Being a good neighbor requires a different mindset and value system than being a good citizen. They often conflict. Good neighbors treat each other as peers. Good citizens treat each other according to official status. Good neighbors seek the personal, intimate betterment of themselves and each other. Good citizens seek the external validation of an impersonal system. Good neighbors align to voluntary, open-ended interactions. Good citizens align to coercive civil authority and imposed hierarchical social orders. Good neighbors insource their ethics. Charity and friendship are the key virtues of their relationships. Good citizens outsource their ethics. Compliance with the commands of rulers and enforcers is a fundamental and necessary aspect. Some might call it a civic virtue. Good neighbors consent. Good citizens conform.
Hello there, everybody, and welcome to the NEWSPASTE podcast with me, your host, Johnny Vedmore. I'm here with Domenic Scarcella. I wanted to call him Scarcella. Mr. Scarcella, how are you? But then that would mean being racist towards Italians. I think if you do, I just briefly before we start speaking, Domenic, I tell you a story. Yesterday, I was having a conversation with someone, and I realized something. I started to think outside the box on lots of different things, and I was thinking, if you go to if I was to do a Chinese accent in the middle of London or something, people would be like, "No, you just can't do that. That's terrible. That's racist. That's awful." But if I went to China, I think Chinese people might pay me to be a white gringo guy doing a Chinese accent, and they would find it hilarious. So it always depends where you're from, is whether something is racist or not. And it's usually things aren't racist to the people who are actually of that race. So are you offended, first of all, Domenic, by my hatred of Italian people?
Quite the opposite. I'm impressed that you know the Italian pronunciation. My name has been Americanized. I live here in the state of New Jersey.
Brutalized. We call it brutalized in the trade.
It's been brutalized. Yes, my name has been brutalized. It's brutalist architecture, but with linguistics.
Brutus, because there's a bit of Brutus in there, isn't there? Right. Listen. You know, we've had a couple of like very small interactions, conversations. I haven't managed to read all of your book. I've read bits of it, that's for sure. I'm really interested by the concept, especially how it kind of uses one of the most important and prescient religious stories and narratives of all kinds. Oh, there it is. It's just popped up. Good Neighbor, Bad Citizen. This is really interesting book, my friend. Good Neighbor, Bad Citizen. It's a really interesting idea because it allows you to view the idea of what protest is through different lenses, really, and makes you think about what society is, whether you are a citizen or whether you are a neighbor. Because I consider myself, I was once definitely in relatively in between the two, I would say, but now I would describe myself as a good neighbor and a very, very bad citizen. I'm very naughty, and they don't like me at all. But for other people, first of all, how did you come up with the idea of the book?
Sure. I've been practicing Christian for I don't want to say all my life, because that would not be true. I grew up in a culturally Christian family, neighborhood, extended family, and nominally Christian society here in the U.S. But I didn't take it seriously until late teens, when I was just better able to understand anything. And so I've been a practicing Christian for a while. My own involvement in not only my own exploration, but also teaching others. I do volunteer, and I've been a coordinator of adult education programs through various parishes, church parishes. And so it had been on my mind for a while, and I had a basic devotionals that I do myself just for personal faith. And it grew out of one of my teaching experiences. Eventually, you always get to the part where you start talking about the churches and Christianity's intersection and interaction with the larger secular society, and so and that becomes governments. And boy, it's been messy over 2,000 years. But the question arose: well, Jesus, he's a good citizen, right? So we all have to be good citizens. And my response was, well, be careful of that. Jesus is a good neighbor, but how good of a citizen is someone who's convicted of a capital crime and then tortured and killed? While most people cheer for it, so how good of a citizen was he? And it brings us into the discussion of our relationships to other people and how those relationships take form. Like, citizenship is a very different way of viewing your fellow humans than neighborliness is. And sometimes there's enough of an overlap on the Venn diagram where, or at least maybe a lack of friction where, you could be a good neighbor and nobody bothers you from the government also. But there's always going to be a clash at some point.
So
And
let's
we
go
see that in Jesus's life.
Let's go to the extremes of that Venn diagram, the parts where it doesn't cross over, because I meet a lot of these people who they're down with the system. The Venn diagram doesn't say. We talk about a Venn diagram and say, and I'm not trying to make any symbolism here. So anybody who can see this now, and just overlapping my fingers, two circles. I don't want to make any sort of erroneous symbol. I'm not making anything. And a Venn diagram shows the crossover between the two things. But this seems to be switch in and out over time. It's almost like a heartbeat moving, and those extremes. People are either like, I've watched, like, I can go back 7 years when I was first reporting on the Epstein case, and I was a terrible conspiracy theorist who was against society, and all my neighbors thought I was lying to them, to now where all my neighbors say, oh, you were telling us the truth all that time, we're sorry we didn't believe you, and etc. That's the kind of extremes where you flip from side to side. And there's loads of parts of society and life and politics where I see this thing happen, the switch of the extremes to the binary extremes, and I try and talk about it quite a lot, because I think it's really important that we understand how this all works, how we switch from one to the other and one to the other, and we miss out a lot of what's in the middle. Where, this is really my question, where do you place yourself personally on that Venn diagram and the overlapping parts?
I aim to be a good neighbor, and that doesn't mean I'm necessarily a troublemaker. I don't go out looking for trouble.
I do.
Yeah.
No, I just didn't go on.
Well, and in your line of work, it's that what you do as a good neighbor, as a truth seeker, it just puts you into contact with the system more often than with the politicized system more often than not, including the sad politicization of even Christian and institutional church clashes. I've seen your reports on the Vatican, and it's a sad state of affairs over there. But hey, it's been for 1,700 years, going back to the time of Constantine. So there's back when you talk about the Venn diagram changing, and I'm not sure if I'm also putting gang signs up on the screen. But
you're a Crip. I didn't know you were a Crip. All of this time.
you and I are maybe we flashed opposing gang symbols. I'm not sure.
Yeah, maybe.
But it is it's a function of your seeking of truth. The more I looked into, okay, what agrees with reality and what is consistent logically and with evidence and with a humane understanding of ethics. Where should I fall? And I found myself wanting to be the good neighbor, and through that lens, and that's why I'd say I'm entirely in the good neighbor circle, regardless of how much overlap there is from other stuff, because I used that lens to view other things. And the more I used that lens to be critical of things like government, I found myself just moving away from government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think a large part of what you just said there is the applying the logic to it all. That you end up coming out as a good neighbor if you apply logic to any circumstance, because you realize that actually a lot of the expectations of you as a citizen are illogical for your life and for those around you, and that it's a supposed sacrifice you have to make for the greater good. But it's a greater good made up by someone who isn't thinking of humans, is thinking almost algorithmically.
Sure, sure. It's all about your highest values in life, where you derive meaning. I've written and spoken about in the U.S., for instance, we believe, a lot of people believe, because of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, that there's this separation of, say, religion and government, separation of church and state, and that's not true, because all governments are religions.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you know what a religion is. It comes from the old Latin phrase for binding together, and the idea is that you bind together with people based on shared deeper meaning of the purpose of humanity, what our goals should be, what our lives are like.
Mm-hmm.
And governments have always been that. They've all emerged like that. They are you have to believe in something in order to have any sort of political cohesion, especially because at some point you notice that it kind of becomes illogical. So if it's not logic that's binding you together, it's got to be something. If it's not strict evidence that's binding you together, it's got to be some sort of meaning that you're deriving as you interpret the world. So all governments are religions as well. You can't get away from the fact that as humans we have limited knowledge, and we do our best, hopefully, to mitigate that as we interact with each other.
Yeah. And that idea, government's religious itself, well, I mean, I think we apply the word cult to a lot of these, so because isn't it almost like a hermetic order in itself, a governing body or governing institutions? All of them, how they present as an almost as a beast. Sorry to use that
They do.
word.
Yeah, I agree. It's almost takes on a life of its own. It becomes rather theistic. I mean, old governments, it's why old civilizations all had gods that they worshiped, that they would project aspects of the human experience and aspects of the natural world, and they would anthropomorphize them. So you notice about yourself that you have competing influences in your own life. So you wonder where those come from, and you make gods. You project your experience. You see the natural world. The sea is very powerful, and it does things that sometimes you understand, but sometimes you don't understand. And so you assume there's an intention and a willpower behind it. You create a god. You create a god of the harvest. So God creation is people anthropomorphizing aspects of their own experience and aspects of nature. And there are always gods associated with social orders, with large social orders, because it is what binds people together. And even in modern secular enlightened nations, it's more like the old Roman Empire. There's a misunderstanding that says early Christians were persecuted by the Roman Empire for being Christians, for worshiping Jesus. That's not true. They were persecuted because they would not worship Rome. See, Rome didn't care who you worshiped as long as you worshiped Rome. You could have whatever else you wanted as long as you worshiped Rome. And that even happens in modern enlightened nation states. I see that in the US. You can have whatever religion you want as long as you also worship the US government and your ideal of patriotism and assorted quote unquote civic virtues. So it is deeply religious, and it speaks to the fact that people search for meaning in things. Like the draw, the lore of deeper meaning, that lore exists before we find it, and it has to, or else we wouldn't move towards it.
So you would, so you're definitely in the center of the Venn diagram, not right in the center, but in over there, just on the lines where you're like, okay, I will accept that we need government and that we need to be involved in some sort of governance. So we need to all organize in some sort of way, and we can't just expect people to do it like ad hoc. We need some form of organization and agreement and consent with all of that. But you're really far along the area where that consent should start from individuals and freedom. Now, this is one of the things that I was very interested in, how you were describing, in the intro of your book, how you're describing what each of these things are and how they differ from each other. So give people a bit of an understanding of what I'm currently not saying very well.
No, it's a good lead-in. Thank you. Do you mind me reading a little from the book?
Go for it, my friend. Love it.
Okay. Being a good neighbor requires a different mindset and value system than being a good citizen. They often conflict. Good neighbors treat each other as peers. Good citizens treat each other according to official status. Good neighbors seek the personal, intimate betterment of themselves and each other. Good citizens seek the external validation of an impersonal system. Good neighbors align to voluntary, open-ended interactions. Good citizens align to coercive civil authority and imposed hierarchical social orders. Good neighbors insource their ethics. Charity and friendship are the key virtues of their relationships. Good citizens outsource their ethics. Compliance with the commands of rulers and enforcers is a fundamental and necessary aspect. Some might call it a civic virtue. Good neighbors consent. Good citizens conform.
Mm-hmm.
So what you brought up about organization and somewhat of an orderliness to our interactions with each other, that is present in good neighborliness even without what we would call a government. A government, a simple definition, especially the modern nation state, a government is an institution that claims a monopoly on violence in a particular territory and for its inhabitants. So it's built on violence. It's the idea that some people get to inflict harm and credibly threaten to inflict harm while others do not. So it's inherently a hierarchy because some people get to do stuff and other people are forbidden from it. And it's a hierarchy based on what we would call in simple ethics, violence, the violation of a person's life or freedom, their intentional actions, or even their duly obtained and cultivated property, because we have a physical nature and we need stuff to live.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is about what is going to be your worldview and your most important values that come from your deepest meaning. And will you, like you said, maybe bounce back and forth wildly? You see trends in society doing that, and you've seen your neighbors do that as they search for truth. At one point, you saying things to them about the Epstein files doesn't make any sense to them. And then 7 years later, perhaps because they're now allowed to talk about it,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
they come around to the information and they view you in a different light. That seems to be very much a citizen mindset where this information is taboo. So without even delving into it, I'm going to consider it taboo. And then later on, this information is no longer taboo. So, okay, now I've received intellectual permission to consider
there
this.
you go. That's the word. That's the word I was about to say. I mean, it's very interesting how it kind of is the reallocation of permission that government puts upon us. So
Yes.
it is the citizens themselves, our own neighbors around us, are the ones who give us permission to speak about it publicly, not the government. The government puts pressure on them, makes them feel funny, makes them feel weird inside. It fills them full of propaganda that leads them in one direction, and then they do not give permission at a base ground level. So it is our own neighbors who are the permission givers in that sense. Yeah.
As you interact with people, if you're paying attention and really negotiating with people, which is what we do in our lives, if you don't consider yourself to be, a domineering person who gets to intrude on the others, and you're not a person who seeks that kind of slavish lifestyle where someone else just orders you around, then what you're doing is you're constantly negotiating people from a place of equal footing. And yeah, so we're constantly looking for permission. Now, when the permission that we give each other is not from an honest place in our own hearts, but is simply carrying out something that has been told to us from someone else, then really what we're doing is we're becoming little enforcers for that other government institution. And that's the big danger, because there's a meme, for lack of a better term, going around here in the US as to, how can 435 members of Congress and a president dictate to all of us hundreds of millions of people what to do? And it's because so many of those hundreds of millions of people believe in the wisdom or authority of those 435 people and all of their bureaucrats and their law enforcement. And there's a sense where you as a citizen want to become part of that apparatus. You've traveled a lot through Europe. I've heard stories, and maybe you can verify or refute, that especially in Eastern Europe under communist rule, there were a lot of ordinary citizens who were more than happy to snitch on their fellow residents because it gave them prestige within the imposed hierarchical social order, that they were the good, compliant citizens, and that's how they got validation from this.
Well,
this
that's how George Soros
institution
started off in that sense. George Soros worked alongside the Nazis, going house to house. So, I mean, the snitch value gives you rich rewards, because I mean that's one of the most. It becomes what you're describing there. Becomes the government knows these mechanisms. So I often describe that in the way Bohemian Grove's made up, I often use that as a description, courtesy of Alice Ricks from 1896 San Francisco Examiner article. She's such a fantastic writer, amazing writer, and the academic tells the government man how things should go, and the government man gets a Bohemian to sell it to us. Well, that Bohemian sells it to us because there has to be a conduit between their lack of understanding of how to reach us in our hearts, and where our hearts really lie, within communities, within neighbors, within families, and they need conduits for that at all times. And I find I have to just it was in my mind as you were talking there. I'm someone who enjoys consensual adult relationships on all across the line. I like that everybody's in some form of agreement, and I live by that as within my character too. I'll go up to people and I'll talk to them, and if they feel uncomfortable, then I'll leave them be. Today I had a conversation that got very uncomfortable. It was with a young Jewish lady who is a student in the dental college that's near where I live, and we were talking about Israel, what was going on over there. She didn't want to at first, but then we started having a conversation. By the end of it, she was crying. She wasn't crying for good reasons. She was crying because she was clear she was repeating the lines that had been given to her by a governing authority. And the moment that broke down when I was talking to her is that I was listening to her repeat very official lines in a very official manner. And my response was, do you understand? We were talking about Zionism. I wasn't, berating her. I was being very gentle with her. but I did say, you understand there's different forms of Zionism, and people within that act in different ways. You're different if your religious Zionism is going to be have a different output than political Zionism, and each of them can have a negative effect in a different way. And I think as soon as she started to realize that she was a bad neighbor, and I think this is thing, as soon as she realized that she was a bad neighbor, she started to cry. And I felt very sorry for her, because I realized I had just said something that had made her realize something that she wasn't willing to hear before, or maybe had never discussed, because everybody's scared to discuss this subject. And I ended up like giving her a hug for a couple of minutes. We had a hug, and while she cried, and I felt very sorry for her. But it was clear that she was within that area where she was being a good citizen. She was being a good citizen and trying not to look at the other side. And for us, is it important for us to actually experience both sides in that sense?
I don't like to use the term both sides, because it assumes somewhat of a binary, where there's the thing, and then there's just some sort of homogenous opposition to it. I think just open-mindedness when you consider information is important, for however many different basic perspectives you encounter. I mean, it could be more than two sides to a story. Could be a lot of them. There could be overlap between some of the things you're hearing. So I think just general openness, and it's something that, from what I've seen from your work, you do a lot. Is you will ask people questions, and it's not, it's not that you're asking gotcha questions. You're asking a question because you are genuinely inquiring. You want the other person to give you an answer. And as you were just describing, when you can spot somebody just regurgitating someone else's answer, that sets off your senses there, your intellectual senses, that, well, but what do you think about it? What's your impression? You're trying to elicit from a person something that's more human than informationally mechanical.
I also I have to say that I felt like it's harder now for me to do. I've had years of talking to intellectuals. I know I don't want to sound like, "Ooh, I'm so clever." I'm not. I've had years of talking to them, so I have experience with debate, and I have experience with noticing the important parts of debate, how to use logic when I see logical fallacies. She was using a fair few logical fallacies, classic ones that are given to them by state propaganda, given to anybody by state propaganda in any country that you're in. You get state propaganda that will give you logical fallacies that you believe are real and make sense logically, but then turn out to be easily underminable by just thinking about it logically. It was clear. I felt like I was. I said to her at the end, I'm really sorry, because I'm really good at debating. I've had a lot of experience with debating, and I understand that when we were talking there, I was debating as I would with the people I debate with normally. And it that takes a long time, so to kind of like debate like that. And she said, my boyfriend, he goes to speaker's corner and he speaks and etc. And I said, well, if that's the case, ask him if he ever wants to, have a go against someone who is a good debater. He can come and see me. I'll be hanging around doing stuff, and then we can have a conversation. And then he can test out on him. In that way, like, I wanted to be both open and accepting of, but also open an opportunity for more dialogue in the future between people who, I do something that's a bit awkward within this media area too, is that I don't say no to anybody based on who they are. When people ask to speak to me, I went on the Nation of Israel podcast, and that was seriously Zionist podcast, and they liked me very much until afterwards, until they worked out that I was pro-Palestinian in many ways, and then they basically cut me off afterwards and didn't talk to me again. But I wanted to be able to communicate with the other side, and what we see is the other side again. You were very right when you said there, oh, I don't tend to do that because it like props up the binary idea, and I'm always telling people off for living in the extremes when the extremes are never true. The truth is always somewhere in the center of everything. So I still do that myself, and I still can see the other people sitting on their sides, and I don't like to occupy those areas. I like to go somewhere else. So you're very right to mention that binary trap and that's partially why I was talking about the Venn diagram as well, and trying to work out where you're in, because I think anybody who speaks sense would sit in the middle. I would like to have conversations, over anything, just for information, for understanding, and to let the other side see what the other side think as well, and do it without being angry, so that they can maybe, you can actually have a conversation. I do like to laugh as well. What do you do at home? Should you say? I mean, you're part of the Christian community, obviously, in where you are.
Yes.
You got a guitar, I see, in the background. What are your
Yeah,
loves,
on
and
the shoulder.
what keeps you sane while doing all of this stuff?
Well, what I do with Good Neighbor, Bad Citizen, I publish weekly on Substack. I write articles. I also publish a weekly podcast that also is cross-posted on Spotify. So this is part of the sanity. It's what I write about, what I speak about, are the things that are on my mind anyway. I don't. It's work in the sense that it does take a lot of effort for me to formulate my ideas, but it's not work in the sense that it's been assigned to me and by someone else, and if I weren't working, quote unquote, then I wouldn't be thinking about these ideas or grappling with them in my own heart, or even trying to put them into practice as I interact with people.
Mhm.
So it's it's an outgrowth of just who I've become as a person.
Mm.
The
It's a really
the
good
work
way
I
to
do.
describe it. Really good
It's
way to
took me a
describe
long
it.
time, but yeah, it's a good place to be. I wish I could say I were more successful at it, as far as reaching a bigger audience, or being able to do enough of it where enough people trade with me for it that I could earn a living at it. But I'm not there. I'm not even close to being there.
Mhm.
But I do it because it's just a natural outgrowth of of where I am in my life. I had been a professional sports writer for a while. Newspaper editor was really my first career, and so I'm not averse to written communication or even spoken communication. So I do that anyway, and I'm very much how you describe yourself. I find myself, when I speak to people, having to be very conscious that I don't go into debate mode with everybody over everything, because I do have that kind of critical view of the world where I'm not simply accepting information. I'm I'm really engaging with information.
Yeah. 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 I know that feeling. I it's I did some I did some research about the people surrounding information theory, but I didn't really delve into information theory itself. And then I went on a podcast with a couple of people who very interesting folks, and they drew me into questioning information theory a lot more, because it seems to be a very important part of my life, really, is that I give out a massive information by talking to people, and I get a lot of information back. I go out and I meet people, and I make lots of sound, and I make lots of gestures, and I walk in a certain way and act in a certain way to be approachable to people, and in response I get the same sort of information back. I get a range of information coming back at me, and I learned so much from meeting every single person. Like, some of the things you've said so far has led me to kind of look at things a little bit differently here and there, maybe look at my own way of interacting with people. But you've obviously got to be the type of person who's willing to engage to have these conversations, and that is very hard at times. It depends if the trend allows it and whether people are ready for it. So is it just about taking the opportunities when they show themselves?
Yes, looking for opportunities, but also going into an opportunity not having the outcome scripted, and not even have what I'm going to say scripted.
Yes, I agree with this wholeheartedly.
Right? I've when you and I were chatting, emailing about setting up this conversation, there was no talk about well, I'll ask you about this, and maybe we'll talk about this, and most of the conversations I have when I guest on people's podcasts, I've done a few of them, some mutuals that we know, the gentleman at HH, Monica Perez, so some mutuals that we have as
Lovely
well.
guys, lovely, all
Right?
of them. Yeah.
Yes.
Beautiful.
And one of them I did, though, the podcast host, and he's a great guy himself, started saying, well, how about if we talk about this, and I'll ask you about this, and then maybe I'll ask you about this. And I started to get a little uncomfortable because I don't usually do that. And I thought, oh, he probably talks to people who will only talk to him if they get like an itinerary so that they can prepare their
Always a load
answers
of those.
in advance.
Yeah, I've
Right?
worked with some of those.
And so it gave me a perspective on, oh, okay, so I have to remember, not everybody approaches it the way I do, where I will just go into a conversation and actively listen to the person and reply, because I'm confident enough in what I know that I can express it to people. But I've also learned how to say something, and this is going back even more than a decade, that I learned is the ability to say, oh, I don't know much about that, and instead of feeling bad about saying I don't know, you turn it around and say, you seem to know about it. Can you explain it to me? For instance, you were just talking about information theory. I don't know much about information theory. I mean, could you explain information theory to me? Give me the basics of information theory.
So this one of the things, there's information in everything. So our cells have information. Our cells send out information, and in return they receive information. In actual fact, information is being exchanged all over the place, and the life itself is built upon the exchange of information and the interaction between the external and the internal. And that is something that is not only physical. That's the spiritual, mental, that's everything about you is and so then it makes you also ask certain questions, like, if I output more energy, will I get more response equal and opposite to the reaction of the energy I put out and the focus of the energy I put out and the information you put out? And probably the answer is yes. The more information you put out concisely, strategically, and in a way that makes sense to the world, the more you'll get back. Now, so when we're talking about someone who likes to organize that usually projects probably a much more like that's how their character type is. They like things to be structured in order. That suggests that they're that type of character type. They're very orderly. They need their diary. They've got everything noted down. I'm like a disorderly mess a lot of the time. I'm just like, whatever. This is one thing that when we were going to speak, I kept thinking about over and over again. And this is why I love having conversations like you say, ad hoc. We don't know what we're going to talk about. We're gonna enter into a conversation and it's gonna lead to a certain way. So you have like maybe a tiny starting point, and then everything else leads on as it should do. And that's what I think as it should do is I believe probably a religious thing for a lot of people, or like a feeling of like in touch with godliness, is that you feel like there's things you should be doing and there's things you shouldn't be doing. And that's how life works. And the things you should be doing, when you do them, you get loads of things happen that make sense and why you should do those things. And when you do things you shouldn't do, you get loads of stuff that happens that makes sense why those are the things you shouldn't do. And we deep down, we know a lot of this, and we still sometimes make the decision to go and do the things we shouldn't do. But most of all, we try and do the things we should do. And that sort of like, that is also something that if I'm like sending out as much information into the universe as I possibly can, it should be positive. It should be the thing, the type of information I want to receive back, the type of vibe I want to receive back. It makes you think, even when you dance, or when you be silly, or when you shout, or when you cry, what you get back in return does feel like it's a response to whatever you put out there. And when you think of it, it works on a cellular level, it works on a level of light and everything, light and dark, and it makes sense of a lot of things. But yeah, I find that a beautiful, like, the idea that information is in everything, and the processing of information is life itself. And where does that come from? So, I mean, back to you. Where does that come from?
I think we have a lot of embodied knowledge in us. We have a lot that's perhaps held over from, I don't want to get into the whole evolution debate, but species evolve, humans evolve, we change and grow, we adapt, and if adaptations are advantageous, then more and more people adopt them. So I think there's an embodied knowledge that we all have. I think there's from a Christian standpoint, I do believe that in the soul, I believe that there's a humanness that we all have, and the soul is basically an area of tension, because we have a human nature, but we also seem to have something that's not quite a physical nature. So we have a physical, and then we have something that's not reducible to physical as far as anyone's been able to tell. And I think there's a tension there, and I think there's a soul there. I think we each get a glimpse of whatever that transcendent is. And as a, well, I'll break it down like in stages maybe. I do believe in more than just the material world. So that's a starting point, including in my own life, my own psyche. I believe there's more than just physical material there. I believe that the essence and the deepest parts of that are what we would call personality, things like a willpower, things like love, love, charity, meaning seeking the good of the other as other. I believe in virtue. I see that, I experience it, I've been able to practice it, not always very well, but it's there. So that would make me a theist, in the sense that I experience these good transcendent things as person. So that makes me a theist. I also think that these good things are harmonious rather than oppositional and rivalrous. So I would not be a polytheist. I don't think there's, like a Mount Olympus where the gods are fighting with each other over who gets control of the divine will that day or that week. I think there's something harmonious about it. So that makes me a monotheist. I also think the most complete revelation of that is the person of Jesus of Nazareth 2,000 years ago. So that makes me a Christian. Now, all sorts of other people, and you can place yourself somewhere along that road I've sketched out. Which house are you in? Do you believe in the transcendent, but you believe it's more rivalrous and sometimes disharmonious at its best than harmonious? And I do believe in evil. I just don't I believe evil is a different thing that competes, and that's not really what I believe in as God. I just think it's there, and it's something to grapple with, but it's not something to pursue in a sense. So that's me and a description of where I am with what it means to be just a human. I've tried to write more about human nature every now and then on my Substack, because I get into it a little bit in the book. Like it's there if you're digging, but I don't explicitly come out and say, yeah, well, this is human nature and this is what we need to grapple with. I wrote about it in an article back in December titled, strangely enough, Liberty and Human Nature. And I get into the aspect that our human nature is basically, it's the tension of emergent consciousness within limited humanness.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something about us that is tension.
Yeah.
And it makes freedom possible, but it also makes anti-freedom very attractive. And so we have to grapple that. Like I hear, I'm an anarchist myself. I'm a voluntarist. And so one of my pet peeves with fellow people who are in, say, liberty advocacy, freedom advocacy, is that they assume that freedom is our human nature. And, I have to just stop them and say, have you met humans? Like, do you know
live with
yourself
anybody?
that well?
Live with anybody and see how that works out for you.
Like, humans seek as much. Humans seek being told what to do as often as we seek just coming up with it ourselves. People seek having their ethics outsourced to someone else make the decision. Then all I have to do is either I'm just doing my job. I'm just following orders. Suddenly the ethics become not the thing itself, but just whether or not I obeyed someone else who told me to do the thing. So I've outsourced the ethics to somebody else. If it turns out to be the wrong thing to do, not my fault, it's their fault. I'm the good person. I did what I was told.
That's the majority of folks. I mean, that's the majority, and we know it from. People always like to talk about, and I used to say it all the time about the Milgram experiment and the idea of, like, deferring responsibility to a guy who you don't even know what his qualifications are, but he's sitting in the corner in a white science coat, and you're just like instantly like, oh well, guy's telling me to murder this guy, keep electrocuting him over and over again, so that must be okay because the guy in the white coat says it. And that's there's a factor within everything that I investigate that people, I watch how people detach themselves from accountability and responsibility in using loads of different mechanisms, loads of different ways, because there is a lot of intelligence, there's a lot of people in government, there's a lot of people who don't want to be held accountable, and law is created, especially Western law is created in a way that means that you can get to a point where you can choose not to hold people to account, and instead you hold entities to account that don't really exist for the human behavior within inside those entities. So JP Morgan gets the fine for what Epstein, Staley and others were doing within JP Morgan, but we should know really that if we want to stop people committing crime, then there should be a punishment for the people rather than the entity itself. But we know how this works. We know the deferring of responsibility because we do it with ourselves all the time. We like to defer responsibility, and taking responsibility in your life and in your community, it means that's the insourcing part, because you said you outsource I want to go. Can you pick up those what you read, and can we go through each one individually? And have a little, just discuss it a little bit. Here we go. Sure. This is me creating organization ad hoc as well. And you've already organized it, which was very nice for you.
There you go. Spontaneous order is a good thing. We all have, our minds seek connection. That's really what logic is. Mm-hmm. So yes. We're seeking connections, and logical fallacies that you brought up earlier are really when we either skip ahead in steps and don't actually demonstrate connections, or we go against available evidence and insist on something that is not evident at all. So it's the failure to demonstrate connection, because we are connection seeking creatures.
Yeah, it's wonderful to explain to people. Like, I think one of the easiest routes to waking people up is getting them to take one logical fallacy that they can find, like, you know, whataboutism or something, and concentrating on that first and noticing it when it comes up in different parts of society. And after a couple of months, they've seen it a fair few times, and then they can go on to the next logical fallacy. And before they know it, they're realizing that nearly all of the things that are being said on TV are logical fallacies, and they're starting to understand that there's other logical fallacies that they're starting to go, and they open up their mind to logic. And if you open up someone's mind logically, then the rest of it is just, you know, people see for themselves, which is something we're always aiming to get people to do, is see for themselves.
Yeah, because like you were describing to me, and thank you for that information theory about how we put out information to the world and we're also receiving information back. And as we become more conscious of the information we're putting out, it invariably makes us more conscious of the information we're receiving as well, because now you're making the conscious effort at both sides. And so, yeah, once you become aware of logic and of fallacies, then you get to the point where you just understand logic as it is and fallacies as they are. So even if the fallacy doesn't have a fancy name, you can just pick up, oh, wait, that's not really a demonstrated connection. It's called argumentum ad baculum, and it's basically an argument from forcing people to do things. It's might makes right. I didn't know it had like a fancy Latin name as a logical fallacy, but when you get to the point where you understand what logic is and you understand what the failures of logic are, fallacy, then you don't have to have someone else tell you what the name of the fallacy is. You can just spot, wait a minute.
Yes.
That connection wasn't demonstrated.
Yes.
And I don't know if it has a name or not, but I'm spotting something that is missing in this argument.
Yeah, I spend this is something that I say to people, you know, start spotting them out, but that's a route to just understanding how logic works and what logic is, in like a sense of it, because that sense of it is really what you're looking for, and that takes some time. Because I really did think I had a good logical mind, but then I discovered I wasn't able to taking much from the other side of the debate, because every time I listened to them, I would be like, it makes me feel awkward, so I don't want to listen to it anymore. And then I stick within my realm of information where all the information makes sense. It's all fine. Everything makes sense. But that was part of my route to becoming a journalist, was saying, okay, you know, I constantly contradict myself over a decade about what I see and what I experience. And part of it is because I'm not engaging into the other side. I'm not going across the most uncomfortable part and communicating with the other side and seeing what they're saying and understanding what they're saying. Because if I think that they're using logical fallacies, or if I think they're lying to me, then I should be able to see it. I should be able to see it. And so what I did was listen to Ben Shapiro for an entire year, every single day. And that was the best way to understand logical fallacies, because afterwards, Ben Shapiro is amazing. He is just like, it's probably 90% whataboutism, dressed up in all different, he uses a load of different grammatical ways to not say, but what about what they're doing? He uses loads of tools of grammar, but really most of it is whataboutism. And then there was some other fallacies that were thrown in there. But if you really don't like someone, it's best to understand why you don't like. If you get a sense that someone's lying to you, it's best to understand what they're actually doing to you, that makes you, so that you can see it again before it even happens. And as soon as I see people like that now, as soon as I see people get a load of limelight all of a sudden and use the same arguments or the same logic behind things, now I'm less susceptible to following silly trends. And I find I don't tend to listen to most of the media nowadays. There's no point in it, because that's really what it is. Yeah. So let's go through. So the first one you had the because I
Good
find
neighbors
this really
treat each
interesting.
other as peers.
Sorry, say it again.
Good neighbors treat each other as peers. Good citizens treat each other according to official status.
That's an amazing start. So that's something that I think we all understand. I think we all understand the fact that so good neighbor is almost the same as the quality of what you'd expect in a friendship.
Yes.
Yet, good good citizen may be closer to a family,
Uh,
more distant relatives.
um, well, the key aspect of friendship is that friendship is an affection that grows out of shared experience.
Mhm.
And for the most part, that affection uh, comes about because you get to see the other person as on the same level as you in some regard. So there is a peer aspect to a genuine friendship. Um, you brought up before that, and it's been woven through this conversation so far. We seek information back from others. We seek a sort of validation. The kind of validation you would get from a peer, from someone who's on the same level as you, is different from the kind of validation you would get from someone who is above you,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
someone who's you would consider to be below you. But it's still a validation, and it still kind of feels good to us.
Mhm.
For instance, I've heard it said that people don't actually want the truth; they just want to be right. And I object to that because I don't think people want to be right. I think people want to feel validated. And
Mm,
there's a
mm,
difference. See, a right is a valid claim. So if you are right about something, then you get a certain bit of validation from it. But what's happening is I don't think people actually want to be right because that takes a lot of effort. And you may find out that you are wrong and then have to change your
mhm.
mind. I think
Quite a
people
lot,
just want
actually.
to skip ahead, right?
Yeah.
It's like logic. It's like a logical fallacy. People want to skip ahead to just the feeling of
Mhm.
validation.
Yes, yes. I agree with that, and I agree. I mean, it's why people don't want to really converse in the first place. I think, to be honest, what you're saying there is why the majority of people would prefer to keep themselves to themselves
Mhm.
because it's easier to validate yourself if your external world doesn't change too much, or your
Yes.
you don't have so many interactions. I find it very interesting this. In a sense, I'm somebody who goes up to people and talks to them. So I will talk to someone randomly in the street. I play my music loud. I have a dog that runs up to people and says hello. I'm a very approachable and sociable person. I know everybody in my community. I try to get to know everybody, and I like that ability to discuss things. But once upon a time, I had anxiety and OCD tendencies, and a lot of those that was aligned with the fact that I was seeking some form of validation from people who were never going to validate me. And really, that is something that maybe religion takes its place. That you get a validation from an almighty or a higher being. Is that would that be fair to say?
It is fair to say, I think how people treat religion could be either way. You can
Mm,
treat religion as sort of a citizenship. That's what governments are, which are all religions, where there's a way to quote unquote do Christianity as if it's just a long series of rules.
mhm,
And the reason why people like rules is because it gives you a clear marker of valid or invalid. And so you can treat your religion that way. If you can treat your gods that way, however many of them you have. You can, or you can treat your religion as something that is is not seeking that kind of pat on the head validation, but is actually your search for a greater understanding of of what truth is and the source of that truth. The word faith It's changed over the years. I've heard faith mean just, it's something I don't know, but I'm guessing at. There's a phrase I heard that popped up recently again called God in the gaps, meaning there's a bunch of stuff we know, and then whatever we don't know, those little gaps in our knowledge, we'll just put God in there. We'll say, oh, it's God. We don't know that yet, so we'll call that God. And to me, that's a strange thing to call God. And that's also a strange way to think about faith as well. Faith is just stuff I guess at. The ancient understanding of faith as a practice, as something you do, is that faith is a freely given assent to truth and to the perceived source of that truth. So it involves consent, which is freely given, but the assent part, A-S-S-E-N-T, it's not like ascending a staircase. It's toward knowledge. So it's with the knowledge you have, you move towards more, because you perceive you perceive a progress, and you perceive that it's going to get to a source of truth. And that's a very different way to practice a religion than as a set of rules that give you instant feedback, valid, invalid, valid, invalid, valid, invalid, pat on the head, pat on the behind because you did it wrong, So I think people can do religion in either of the ways you described.
Yeah. It makes me think
Christianity has suffered from that over the centuries, over the millennia as well.
We do chop and change our mind as humans. We do decide to go one way and then the other. I think that's why neoconservative meddling is so useful. It flips between the whatever's popular at the time. It just follows a trend and looks for a best way to. I was thinking of something else. I was when you were talking, and it will come back to me. I'm pretty positive. But
I should give shorter answers, so when something pops into your mind, I've summed up what I'm saying.
Yeah. No. It's fine. That's fine. I find it. I just find having this conversation, it makes me think of a lot of different ways that we act within society, and how what you're describing there also relates quite to politics in different ways and to other parts. So I was thinking really about third way ideology, because where you're saying, this God of the gaps where it fills up, you just fill it up with religion. Well, they do that with third way politics. They got lots of things that all of the if you drag everybody into the center ground of politics, there's no solutions. All the solutions are on the left or the right, and load of gaps appear, and they fill those gaps up with austerity, war, and intelligence meddling. And so all of those things become like God in the world of government. That those in a sense become the essence of their divine, the divine of the greedy material world, in that sense. And that maybe suggests that politics itself is a much more material ideology, because you have to have all of these functions of state. You have to have everything written down into carefully and concise law that everybody can supposedly agree on, but nobody actually does agree on. What's the second one? Come on, let's go. Let's go with the second one.
Good neighbors seek the personal, intimate betterment of themselves and each other. Good citizens seek the external validation of an impersonal system. So it kind of follows on what we were just talking about.
Yeah, it made me think of COVID as soon as you said it, to be perfectly honest. It made me think of that as well. Okay, go on. The next one. We
Good neighbors align to voluntary, open-ended interactions. Good citizens align to coercive civil authority and imposed hierarchical social order.
Okay, again, the freedom movement is within that. The COVID, you can see there's a lot of people who disagreed because they were like, I want my own personal autonomy. Thank you very much. I'm an individual. I don't get caught up. And there's a lot of people who looked for the validation from above, and you could see that unless things were and this happens within conversations that people are allowed to have. People, I was talking about Epstein case for say 7-8 years. I'm talking about the case, and then when it comes down to people like avoid talking about it with me, or they find it very uncomfortable, they don't believe anything, and then once they release the Epstein files, even though those same people have not read any of those files or looked at any of the information, it is validated that that is a thing they're allowed to accept and talk about, and that wider validation suddenly becomes the more important thing, and you realize no one actually listens. They're just waiting for the government to tell them it's okay to talk about something.
Yes. Yeah, and the key word there is imposed, in imposed hierarchical social order. I tell people I'm against the imposed hierarchical social order, and they think, oh, you don't like order. I'm like, no, I like spontaneous order and emergent order. That's fine. It's like, well, then you don't like hierarchies. No, hierarchies are quite natural, and we all have them. The priorities you have in your life are a natural hierarchy. I'd rather do this than that. I'd rather do that than this other thing. But the imposed part is the problem.
Yeah, because the reason why you probably need spontaneity is everything becomes corrupt over time. So the imposed hierarchy will become corrupt. Something that is much more spontaneous is much less likely to get to that stage, and entropy is built into everything. So if you create a mechanism, you create a function and order, it will eventually have to change, morph, or be dissolved, because it will die in time. So something much more spontaneous is what I mean. That's a hard thing to understand. Do you have ways to describe that sort of spontaneity within this realm, what we're talking about?
Sure. Spontaneity, it speaks to our limits of knowledge and just our limits of ourselves, and you have to be comfortable with possibility. And that goes back to our human nature. We seek answers to things, and so it can be very, very alluring to just pretend to have certainty. Now, it doesn't mean we shouldn't reach conclusions in our lives, but when your need for certainty is so strong that you want your vision imposed on others as a way of pretending that you don't have to deal with possibility anymore, that becomes the problem. So I think you have to be open to possibility. And that, you mentioned imposed systems can become corrupt. I would go farther and say that the imposition itself is corruption.
Is the corruption. Yeah. Okay. That is a much better way to understand it. That is a really and a slight difference makes a lot of difference. One of those. Sure. Yeah.
Because if you believe that it's just that the imposed system might become corrupt, then you're always in this cycle of, well, if we just get better people in charge, it'll all work out. Get better people in charge of violence? How does that work?
Well, the Mossad. We're talking about the CIA and the Mossad now. They're the best when it comes to that. I'm so glad they're around. I mean, without them, what would we have? I mean,
looks like we have a visitor there. Does your visitor have a name?
Yeah, this is Falco Chow Chow, named after the Austrian synth musician Falco. Of course, who did Rock Me Amadeus, Rock Me Amadeus, and De Commissar, and some other classic hits. But she is a fantastic. She looks like she's a Russian blue, but she's a dirty liar. That's what she is. She's not a Russian blue at all. She's a little mongrel. She came from a litter of multicolored cats, but she's a beautiful girl. She likes to come in.
Anyone's not able to see the video, just listening on audio, your cat has joined us.
Yes. Oh yeah. That might have. That's true. People will be listening just to the audio of this. Yes, it is. It is my lovely, beautiful grey cat who does like to come in every now and again. Sometimes my dog comes in if we're very lucky. I am trying to set up the studio so I can have my dog here with me as well, because she really likes to just chill around and etc. So, okay, let's go to the next one.
Sure. Good neighbors insource their ethics. Charity and friendship are the key virtues of their relationship. Good citizens outsource their ethics. Compliance with the commands of rulers and enforcers is a fundamental and necessary aspect. Some might call it a civic virtue.
There you go. That is a massive one. And again, I mean, people who experience COVID will understand that. People who experience Brexit and other things in Britain will understand that there is this feeling that we are, if we're being virtuous in a virtuous citizen, then we are somehow good as a person, as an individual. But in actual fact, what we're doing is not thinking about loads of people and acting in a way that allows us to be wrapped in comfort, I suppose.
Yeah, virtues are distinguished from isolated acts that we engage in because virtues become habits. Virtues are moral habits, and habit comes from the old word for have. So when you do something often enough that it becomes something that you have, it becomes second nature.
It becomes
That's your habit, right?
Yeah.
That's your habit. So if your habit is citizenship over and over and over again, it will become second nature to you. And it will become how you color your interactions with people, how you color your behavior and your attitudes. On the other hand, if what you practice most often comes from a different place, then that can become a habit as well. And I hope that because we're able to practice these things, it means that we're never as humans set in stone. Like if you notice something about yourself that needs to change, it can probably change. You know, if it's a physical like I'm about 5'10". I'm not going to like suddenly become 6'10" and go play professional basketball.
Same here.
Right? It's not going to happen.
I become suspicious when women over 6 foot start chatting me up. That's one thing in my life.
There you go. So there are some things that, in that regard, I can't change about myself. But from an attitude or behavioral standpoint, there are lots of things about myself that if I wanted to change, it would take effort, but I could. And depending on how deeply ingrained in me it is, I could change it. So if you've gotten to the point where citizenship is a habit, it'll take effort, but you can modify that about yourself.
Yeah.
You can pick up a good habit of neighborliness and really make it something that you do often enough so that you reduce the friction to starting the action. That's really what you're doing when you're trying to develop a habit. Is there's always friction to acting, and especially friction to starting a long process. But if you can reduce that friction to doing something, then it's more likely that you'll engage in it.
Well, when I was at my worst with anxiety and OCD and all the other things that life gives you as you go through it, sometimes at least, I found that lots of people told me you should go out. You should just go out. No, don't have a point of going out. Just go out and have a walk and etc. And it is massively important to be able to form a habit of going out and being like just around people and just seeing someone and saying hello to them every day. Now, I've developed those. I've created them into every day. My habit is to get up, go out, and talk to absolutely everyone I can talk with and just be around all of the people and stand in the center of it and have conversations with everybody and try and be open and friendly to people. And that's developed so much from the point where I would walk down the street and I would be scared to see someone I knew. I may think, oh, maybe before they see me I'll go across the road and avoid the confrontation or something like this. Maybe something bad can happen or something like this. The modern world is this beautiful open box of people all having their complicated lives, and the majority of them, when you speak to them, they're not even looking for certainty. They're just hoping to make it through tomorrow. They have no hope for the future, a lot of people, because they've seen their TV screens and they've scrolled their doom scroll and they've convinced themselves that there's nothing coming in the future, so they better just keep their heads down. And that really lends to this idea that they just want to conform to an extent and outsource a lot of what they do in general, because that again gives away that accountability and responsibility. I thought that one was an extremely important and vital point to make.
Yeah, outsourcing ethics is that's where. So I've asked people just as a question sometimes. I said, "What's worse, pathological liars or pathological believers?" So what would you say? Pathological liars or pathological believers?
Oh, wow. So what, a pathological believer just believes what they're told?
Yes.
Is
It's
okay.
pathologized to where they just accept everything.
Okay. Yeah, okay. A pathological liar can at least have a party. It's a hard decision to make, but
It
as
is.
I've explained to a few people, what I've discovered in life is that you often get given you get given binary choices. One's really bad and one's a little bit less than really bad, and
Less
you
bad.
know, when you approach those moments, you make the decision on what you believe. But explain to me a little bit more about the point of that.
Okay, and I think COVID is a good example of this. The hoax we just went through, and in some cases, is still taking place 6 years later. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Pathological liars on their own aren't very powerful, and depending on how proficient other people are at spotting lies, they may be quite lacking in power very quickly. I think pathological believers are a bigger problem, because pathological believers can be led astray even if another person is not lying to them. Let's say the other person is just wrong or has incomplete information. A pathological believer can cause, especially since pathological believers tend to travel in groups, they can cause tremendous damage. And COVID was like that. So many people believed it. Now, whether or not the officials were lying or were just wrong or just had incomplete information is a separate question. Maybe they weren't lying. Maybe they were just wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But the pathological believers were a huge, huge problem. Pathological believers are a necessary cause of every great atrocity in human history, whether or not a pathological liar was involved.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the outsourcing of ethics is such a big deal, because that's what gives power to not only pathological liars, but just to people who might be mistaken.
Yeah.
Like, people should be allowed to be wrong. We're all wrong about certain things. People should be allowed to have incomplete knowledge, because we all have incomplete knowledge. Just never give up your capacity as a thinking, feeling, presence-filled person to critically evaluate your own behavior and what other people are trying to get you to do. Have
You're
some insourcing of your ethics.
this is this is a hard one. Okay, mentally, what I'm about to say is hard to, because I went to Amsterdam recently. I was at the so-called trial of Bill Gates, which was an appeal court hearing to allow 5 important witnesses to give testimony in a case that's being held in the Netherlands, that's against more than just Bill Gates, Albert Bourla, a lot of the other people who are involved in what's being referred to as the pandemic, of course. And it's very important to hold these people to account, whatever. I met I hope I keep my train of thought here, because it's very complex. I met up with a guy called Heiko Schoening, who's a very interesting German. He described it, of course, as like a German protest anti-vax doctor who is a psycho-oncologist by trade. So he helps people who have cancer or terminal disease face that terminal disease in a way that lifts up their mental health, and they're able to cope and deal with it, because he says, like is the majority of people kind of die from the fact that they feel like they're going to die. It's going to be hard for me to keep my train of thought here. What was the last bit that you were saying then, just so that I do?
Important to keep our capacity to critically evaluate our own behavior and what other people are trying to get us to do. In-source your ethics.
So there was something when you were talking about that really rung. He showed me, we were talking for about 5 hours. We met up the day after the trial in a hotel, me and Heiko Schoening, and we sat in the bar and we went through a load of stuff. He's the publisher of my ex-partner Whitney Webb's book in German in hardback form, and I was partly involved in the second volume of that. So he wanted me to have copies of the books and stuff, and it was very nice. We had a very nice conversation about stuff. We were both very much on the same side. And he showed me someone called Asim Malhotra, who was a British doctor who, during the pandemic, went on TV and said over and over again that pregnant women and the most vulnerable in society should be the first ones to be vaccinated, or should be vaccinated en masse, etc., before the data was in. And now he's flipped over to the other side. He was the outsourcer of ethics. Those people who outsource their ethics look to Asim Malhotra as this idea of, oh, he's got all of the knowledge, he understands, he's done all of the hard graft of learning all about this stuff, and he's an official advisor for the government, telling me as a pregnant woman that I should have this experimental shot put inside me, so I'm going to do it, is what a lot of people thought. Now he's joined the opposing forces and is saying that the shots give 14 different types of cancer, and that it was the mainstream media's fault for giving him a platform that is the reason why that people like him were allowed to give really bad advice en masse, and so he's been placed to outsource that same sort of, the same disgruntled feeling and the ethics and the morals you're supposed to take. They create a narrative for outsourcing, and he's a perfect example of what you're talking there. At such a high level, he's an outsourcer. He's one of the ones who people take their make their decisions from listening, and for people who are likely to follow those sort of people, understanding how it develops over time and what those people can suddenly change their mind to say the complete opposite thing 4 years down the line, and you've already outsourced your own responsibility and accountability for your own safety and security over to someone who flip-flops like a neoconservative. That's what when you, that's the first thing that came into my mind was Asim Malhotra and what he's currently doing. He's now one of the main advisors for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Nigel Farage. He's flipped completely over and blames really the media for letting him say all of that stuff. It's bizarre.
It is, and it's an example of even those people to whom some of us could outsource our ethics, they themselves, where are they getting it from? Maybe the outsourcers are outsourcing it to someone else, or if they find that they've gotten something wrong, they will invent a reason as for why they were saying it. It's never your own responsibility, and that's another reason why insourcing ethics is involves such an obstacle for people, is because it forces you to be accountable for what you're doing. You have to be responsible. You're saying, look, I'm trying to develop these ethics, and my actions, the buck stops with me. We have a saying in America, the buck stops here, meaning that you can pass the buck, but at some point that bill that action, that idea has to stop somewhere. It has to be
Yeah.
grounded in something. And to insource your ethics is really to take responsibility for your behavior, not simply for your compliance.
Yeah. Most definitely. Okay, let's go with the next one. We'll do the last ones, and then and I
The
will.
last one there, yeah. It's very short. It just says good neighbors consent, good citizens conform.
Boom. That's it. Yeah, that's though. I mean, do you think that you came to that conclusion because you are naturally a libertarian? That you have that voluntarist. I don't know all of the names for all the different things. I stopped on the leave me a fuck aloneism.
There you go.
I like that. I
Sure.
like that. It's like everybody else can do their own thing. I'm doing my own thing. Like, if you're going to come into my world and tell me what I'm meant to do and what I'm not meant to do, I'll be like, go away. I'm not interested. I'd love to live in a society where I could just say, I'll handle my stuff. And when we need to organize and we need to talk about it, let's talk about it, you know? But it really, the idea of conforming is the opposite of that, isn't it?
It can be the way I presented and got to there. Yes. You shared about your own progression to get where you are as someone who can have conversations and speak to people more. It sounds like you had, your extroversion, your extroverted nature, and your maybe anxiety were competing with each other, and you learned how to get over the anxiety and let your other natural gifts shine. For me, I was not always liberty minded and freedom minded. I'm by personality, a very orderly person, high conscientiousness. I look for patterns. I look for logic. I look for things that make sense. Um, the and that can be very stifling. That's where our news bubbles come from, to use a term that's fairly common now. I think a lot of what we've been criticizing in people's bubbles or their information is the pathologizing of rationality, which is different from logic. Rationality is when you grasp your circumstances. Think of the word ratio or the word rations. It involves being able to put a border around something or a container around it.
Mm-hmm.
So rationality is our ability to grasp stuff, and it's very useful. It's what we do as humans. We really need to do that or we couldn't function. However, when you get to what I call hyper-rationality, and it's a term I've heard other people use, so I didn't invent it. So no, I did not invent it. I do not know whether it has a hyphen or not in it. But hyper-rationality, the idea that the only things that matter are the things that are inside my container. That's a dangerous place to be. And it can seem like you're doing logic from there because, again, you're finding connections, but you're only bouncing around within that container. You're not able to get out, and other stuff isn't able to get in. So I've had to work on my very high level of natural talent for rationality. I've had to work on the other side of the toolkit that balances that.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had to work on being more comfortable with possibility, with uncertainty, more comfortable with spontaneous order rather than imposed order. I was a good citizen for a long time because you get instant validation, and if you're orderly, well, why not have it imposed? If you like order, why not force it to be the case? Seems rational, seems logical, but of course you don't notice because you're basing it on a faulty assumption that there's a problem there. There's a problem there now, and it sets up more problems down the line. A big part of logic is learning how to attack the premise.
Yeah.
Like maybe people started from a bad place. Maybe they started from a place that has problems, that has holes in the argument, holes in the premise right there. And that needs to be cleaned up because, your logic simply tells you what's valid. What are the valid connections? It doesn't tell you what's true.
Yeah.
You know, you've heard, maybe you've heard the term, we have it in America, garbage in, garbage out.
Yep.
If you start with garbage, even a perfect process will result in garbage.
Yeah.
You know, so an awareness of that. Consent is a knowledge-based activity. To consent, it means with knowledge. It means, okay, I understand enough what's going on where I can agree to it, where I can lend my participation to it. You know, our natural human rights, there's only basically two things you can do. You can either use or you can withhold use of your life, your liberty, or your property. That's it. You don't get to impose it on other people. It's use or withhold use. You don't get to make the future, although you can try, but there's no guarantee. And you don't get to force other people into your vision.
I've tried.
I've tried. I think everybody has tried. If we're all going to be honest about our own mentality and our own psychology and our own pursuits. So it happens. So consent is, I have enough knowledge, and I'm going to not just consent once. Good neighborliness is an orientation. So as I go through life, I'm going to be looking for knowledge. It could be new stuff that I haven't heard of yet. It could be stuff I've already encountered that's being reinforced. But I'm looking for knowledge, and I'm looking to act with knowledge. I'm going to take responsibility for my participation and for knowing why I am participating. It may turn out later that I was wrong here or there, but I'm going to take responsibility for my participation. To conform, on the other hand, is with the word form, meaning kind of a strength or a structure, where you're just trying to fit into a structure.
With form.
And it's the structure itself, as if that structure somehow imparts a virtuousness and a goodness onto you. And that's a dangerous place to be, because it's an outsourcing. It's a type of guessing rather than a real grappling and engaging with the information that you send out and receive.
That's amazing. I think that is a massive amount of stuff for people to think about.
Yes.
That's a brilliant. I enjoyed this conversation more than I enjoy most conversations. Not that to upset anybody there. I hate talking to you all. No. I love having a conversation where I spent the whole time trying to think and trying to work out how that it relates to me, and how that relates to my experience in the world. And then when I can see that relation, it's always is a couple of things that I will be hanging around at some point in the next week, doing something, running around somewhere, causing trouble here or causing trouble there, and I will think about things that we've said here, and it will resonate with me more and more, because I think what you've done is given me a sense of something I already kind of I'm on that track. I'm on the same track as you. I think we've come from different ends, like you were saying there. You come from an end where you need to create some sort of order of it. I had this weird mixed up life where it was shook around quite a lot. Like, I spent my weekdays in the 20th century, and then I spent my weekends in the 17th century, dressed up in 17th century costume, reenacting battles on a field of 8,000 people. My dad was a commanding officer of a regiment at 250, and we didn't have so many rules imposed in that secure campsite where everybody could run free and live to an extent in the past in many ways, with not so much order, but still another different type of order imposed on our everyday society and how we interact. We had regiments, and we had tertios, and we had the royalists and the parliamentarians, and we were always against the Tower Hamlets boys, and they were always against Birches, and you have your whole thing play out. That gave me a different vision of how to see things, but it also kept imposing. It taught me that order could be just for a certain order, can just be for 3-4 days, and then the order changes again to something else. And there's many contradictions within these things, but also many more similarities. There's not much difference between living a 17th century lifestyle and living as we do nowadays. The only thing that changes really is the shoes, is the technology that's around us, is the things that we've got to connect us to this other world. That a lot of it, we won't learn that much from it. We learn from going outside and meeting people in the real world and living within our communities as well, especially, and helping our communities. Something I feel really passionate about, because I've learned to love the people that I'm around, even when they've often been rude to me at a time when they think that I'm doing, or I am something else, because they've been told that I am something else. And everything you tell me there helps me look at my relationship and my interaction with those people in a different way as well, and keeps solidifying this one thing, which is be easygoing, be chilled, always be friendly, allow other people to be rude if they want to be rude. Eventually they may come round and start being friendly once they work out that what you've been doing is what's called the right thing, is being a good neighbor. And that's a really fantastic message to send out. And I really I really like to implore people to read your work. Where can they find you?
You can find my book on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble, or at lulu.com if you're more of the independent publisher streak. It's available there as on each platform as a paperback or as an ebook in the various formats that each of them support. My regular weekly writing that I've continued from that is at Substack. That's the home base. Good Neighbor, Bad Citizen at Substack. And I publish articles weekly on Wednesdays. I publish podcasts, half-hour podcasts weekly on Sundays. I also do a meditation series on Fridays there. So I'm around and I'm available. One thing you were bringing up is about bouncing between, say, 20th century and 17th century. The things I write about, these are not new problems. These are not problems with only modernity. They go back at least 2,000 or so years, because my book is Reflections on the Core Social Conflict Revealed by Jesus Christ's Way of the Cross. So that's the subtitle of the book. So the conflict between neighbor and citizen, it goes back at least 2,000 years and probably even farther. As long as humans have been around and we've been trying to understand each other and how to relate to each other, there's been a how do I do that? And is it mostly from the standpoint of respect and neighborliness, or is it from the standpoint of imposing and perhaps threatening to get your way? Might makes right. And I explore that not only in the book, but also in the weekly Substack content, both writing and speaking.
That's awesome. I will put all the links down there in the description for anybody who wants to go and peruse, and I suggest they do. Domenic, thank you for coming on the NEWSPASTE podcast.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed this very much. After following your work for a while now, I've been introduced to you by others. It's been wonderful to chat.
Yeah, excellent.
I don't feel different now that I'm older. I don't feel different now. I got my old school coming back, yeah. I don't feel angry, I'm just bored, oh yeah. I don't feel different now. I got my old school coming. Tell me what you need, what you want from life, and I won't, oh God alive, I won't judge. Tell me what'll quench your thirst tonight, and I'll make my bar to 10, yeah. Tell me what you need, what you want from life, and I won't, oh God alive, I won't judge. Tell me what'll quench your thirst tonight, and I'll make my bar to 10 to you. 10. I don't feel different, I'm just bolder. I don't feel different now, I got my old school coming back. Yeah, I don't feel angry, I'm just bored of this shit. Oh yeah, I don't feel different now, I got my old school coming. It's coming. Tell me what you need, what you want from life, and I won't, oh, gotta lie, I won't judge. Tell me what'll quench your thirst tonight, and I'll make my bar to 10, yeah. Tell me what you need, what you want from life, and I won't, oh, gotta lie, I won't judge. Tell me what'll quench your thirst tonight, and I'll make my bar to 10, yeah. To you. Yes to 10.